They are by and large useless unless you have an identified deficiency. Do you take any vitamin supplements?
No, because I always think that I should, and then I go to the supermarket and it's $45 for a bottle, and I'm like, man, like, I'm not spending half of my weekly food budget on one bottle of vitamins. That's ridiculous.
It just seems like a scam at that point, right?
It
like
does.
When it's $45 or whatever, and you're getting clearly very limited benefits, you can see it's not going to amount to much.
I feel exploited.
Vitamin D, calcium, vitamin C, beta-carotene, selenium do no harm, but no apparent good. According to this research, niacin and some antioxidant mixtures can increase the risk of mortality. There is a link between folic acid and a reduced risk of stroke and cardiovascular disease, and also a positive link for pregnant women with vitamin D. Look, generally, we've known this for many years, haven't we? We've probably... I remember Jean McLean, the Dunedin City Councillor who used to be on Beauty and the Beast on television, saying basically that all the good in vitamin pills gets flushed down the loo. You know how you remember certain things that people say? Yeah. So that was probably 30 years ago. And yet we still buy the vitamin pills, don't we? So we don't believe the research.
No, we like to think that it's like buying lotto, right? You know you're not going to win, but you buy a ticket anyway.
It's such a classic thing. I mean, it ties right back to the methamphetamine testing stuff that we had at the start of the program. I mean, we knew, I can't remember how many years ago, that this was just that you only needed to get meth testing and meth decontamination if your house had been the site of a meth lab. This wasn't new information. It was just that we kind of all had collective amnesia and forgot about it.
I think there's also collective hysteria about meth at the moment in New Zealand, which that taps into. And there's always that hysteria about healthy. You should be healthier. You should be doing all these things. You should be exercising and, yoga and crystals.
Anyway, it'll no doubt be disputed, this research, by the big pill industry, and it is just one piece of research, but it's a reasonably authoritative one. We've been discussing whether the government's opened a Pandora's box of wage rise expectations, as Simon Bridges said, or whether wages were squelched down for 9 years and the lids come off the pressure cooker. We've had a big mailbag from people describing how hard they work across various occupations and how poorly paid they are and unpaid. A profile piece in the New York Post tells us about hedge fund tycoon James Simons, who heads Renaissance Technologies. And last year, he earned $194,000 an hour.
Oh my God.
He's the highest earning hedge fund manager in the annual survey by Institutional Investors Alpha magazine.
It is just terrible.
So that is New Zealand $278,000 an hour.
And I love how midwives had to fight for so long to get a raise, and this guy's getting paid over $200,000 an hour to manage hedge funds, which were complicit in the massive crisis that we had with the financial crash.
Yeah, which is the theme of the new book Tailspin by Stephen Brill, which we don't have time to go into. And he says basically that what they started has resulted in household debt and low wages and the full catastrophe.
Unbelievable.
That's a cheery note to end on.
You could do a lot with that money though, couldn't you?
You could.
Verity Johnson, thank you very much for being on the panel today.
Thank you, Jim.
And thank you too, Peter McKenzie.
Thank you so much.
Lovely to have your company and everybody's this week. Thanks everybody, and have a lovely long weekend if you're having one. We're back on Tuesday, and Checkpoints with John Campbell is coming right up.
Tōtu marae hoa mā, hei kōrero, kei te haere, hei kaupapa, kei te karawhio. Welcome to Checkpoint, everyone. Tonight, a beneficiary evicted from his house in New Zealand home after one room was found to be 0.09 over a limit which has now been discredited, is still paying MSD back for the emergency motel he should never have been in the first place. Also tonight, Sir Peter Gluckman joins us to tell us when his team first began reviewing the 0.5 limit and contamination. And a man who spent $40,000 needlessly decontaminating his house calls for the government to consider compensation for landlords too. Also tonight, Gypsy Day, and we'll tell you where M. bovis meat ends up. All of that and more coming up.
RNZ News at 5, Talofa Lava, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The chair of Housing New Zealand says she'll not resign over the meth hysteria scandal. The Housing Minister, Phil Twyford, this morning apologised to hundreds of the housing agency's tenants who were wrongly evicted from their state houses after it misused meth tests. Here's our political reporter, Benedict Collins.
A report this week from the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor found there was no health risk from third-hand exposure to meth residue and that it was simply a moral panic. Mr Twyford says the housing agency treated its tenants appallingly and wasted more than $100 million on unnecessary decontamination. He has ordered a full review. Housing New Zealand's chair, Adrienne Young-Cooper, would not be interviewed, but she says she will not resign. Its chief executive, Andrew Mackenzie, also refuses to be interviewed. From Parliament, Benedict Collins.
The former Prime Minister and National Leader Bill English has declined to apologise to those wronged by the meth testing botch-up. The National Party has defended its role, saying its ministers were following the best advice at the time. Mr English, who at one point was the Minister in charge of Housing New Zealand, was asked whether someone from his former government should say sorry.
I'm not going to make a political statement about that the people who succeeded me can deal with that. All I'm saying is that the government at the time acted on the official advice. It would have been unprecedented probably for the minister at the time to override that official advice.
The former Prime Minister Bill English. The police are still responding to an aggravated robbery which took place in Hastings this afternoon. Officers and the Armed Offenders Squad responded to reports of a robbery at a bar on King Street around midday. They're now at a residential address on Karamu Road South trying to locate the offenders. Several local schools were put into lockdown as a result of the incident. A medical professional was fired when she tried to prove she was being bullied on the job at Tauranga Hospital. Anna Shaw says she endured 4 years of feeling belittled and ignored by management at the hospital run by the Bay of Plenty District Health Board. The DHB asked her to provide evidence she was bullied and she gave them patient notes she said a co-worker had tampered with. She was fired for breaching patient confidentiality. Anna Shaw says she's since been unable to find work as the dismissal looms over her.
I have to keep going now for the it's more for integrity than anything else, and for people to be accountable, which I know is not going to be easy.
Anna Shaw. The DHB won't comment on the case while it's before the Employment Relations Authority, but says the incident was investigated and dealt with at the time. The Prime Minister says the government's $46 million investment package for Northland aims to address inequality. Jacinda Ardern, who made a whirlwind tour of the far north today, says the initiatives include job creation, social and state housing, tourism and $500,000 to investigate rail opportunities in Northland.
This is all about investing in the north, generating job opportunities, investing in infrastructure and things that local government and the local communities have asked for support from government around.
Jacinda Ardern. Canada has hit back at steep United States tariffs on aluminium and steel, announcing retaliatory duties on up to $16 billion of American imports. The Trump administration moved today to slap a 25% import tax on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminium imports from key allies, the European Union, Mexico and Canada. The Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau told a news conference that the tariffs are an affront.
These tariffs are totally unacceptable. For 150 years, Canada has been the United States' most steadfast ally.
The Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The French President Emmanuel Macron has reportedly called Mr Trump, telling him the tariffs are illegal. The Commerce Commission has launched High Court proceedings against payday lender Ferritum, which it says charged borrowers 183% in interest. The Commission hopes a judge will order some of the customers' loans to be reopened. The Commerce Commission says the company failed to help borrowers reach informed decisions about the loans, allegedly using pressure selling tactics and oppressive terms. It also says Ferritum failed to exercise reasonable care in its advertisements. Yesterday, the Commission launched a review of the websites of 215 lenders to determine if they were complying with lender responsibilities. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport, High Performance Sport New Zealand says full details about allegations of misconduct from a departed Cycling New Zealand coach will only be revealed after a thorough investigation. Head sprint coach Anthony Peden stepped down from his role on Wednesday, and media reports have linked him to allegations of bullying and an inappropriate relationship with an athlete. Michael Scott, who took over as head of high performance sport in January, won't go into detail about the situation until the investigation is completed, but says their stance on behaviour of that kind is clear.
We do operate in a pressure and intense environment, but again want to stress that there is absolutely no place for bullying in our high performance system. Michael
Scott. The Hurricanes are away to the Highlanders in Dunedin tonight, and the Southern team has yet to lose at home this season. The Wellington side won 29-12 in their round 6 clash earlier in the Super Rugby competition. Meanwhile, the Blues star Sonny Bill Williams has been ruled out of rugby for up to 4 weeks after aggravating a knee injury at training this week. And the Golden State Warriors have drawn first blood in the NBA Finals series in overtime, beating the Cleveland Cavaliers 124-114 after the teams were 107 all at full time. Game 2 is on Monday. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, we've got a mixtape from King Kapisi. Country Life is peddling the Hauraki Rail Trail. Something for the Weekend takes us to Oamaru, aka Steampunk Central. And because Karen Hay is still away, after the news I'll be nipping over to this show again. As in lately, where we'll be looking back at some of the big stories of the day and maybe a few developing ones. Oh, and because the International Cheese Treaty was signed on this day in 1951, we've got a Sonic Tonic dedicated to the dairy product in all its guises. From cheddar to blue vein, it's a rich vein. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, a few showers developing this afternoon. Rain spreading south tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. Northeasterlies, gale in exposed places tomorrow. Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, a few showers becoming more frequent tomorrow. Auckland to Waitomo, also Taumaranui and Taupo, mainly fine today. Cloud increasing tomorrow and patchy rain spreading south. Taranaki to the Kapiti coast, including Taihape, fine with morning frosts in sheltered places. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, cloudy periods, a few showers south of Napier, spreading further north tomorrow morning but clearing about Wellington. For all of the South Island except for Canterbury and coastal Marlborough, fine with morning frosts but persistent low cloud or fog in some valleys. Canterbury and coastal Marlborough mostly cloudy, a few showers developing this evening, and the Chatham Islands cloudy periods and the odd shower. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. We begin tonight with methamphetamine contamination and the costs to one man who was evicted from his Housing New Zealand home. His name is Robert Eruiti, and he'd lived in his Housing New Zealand property for 15 years. His eviction followed tests in 8 rooms. 7 samples were at levels so close to zero they barely registered at all. The 8th was 0.59 with a limit of 0.5. Robert lost his home and everything he owned for being 0.09 over a limit now scientifically discredited to the point of absurdity. He was never charged. No one really believed he was responsible for any meth contamination, but because his was the name on the tenancy agreement, he was evicted. We looked at Robert Eruiti's case because after his eviction, he spent 58 weeks in emergency accommodation at a cost of $44,000. Checkpoint's Michelle Cook first told that story on this program last December, and Phil Twyford heard it at the time and came on live to apologise.
I listened to Michelle Cook's story on Checkpoint last night, and I heard them tell the story of what's happened to Robert since he was evicted more than a year ago, and first living in a motel, then a grotty boarding house, and now living in a tent. And it really summed up for me what I felt for a while now about how wrong Housing New Zealand's policy has been handling this issue of meth contamination. And I felt that it was so bad and so wrong what had happened that Robert deserved an apology. So I went and met with Robert and his daughter Casey, and I apologised to them on behalf of the government.
Phil Twyford making his first apology to a Housing New Zealand evictee on Checkpoint 6 months ago. Robert Eruiti's daughter is Casey McCarry. I spoke to her a short time ago and she told me her father is still repaying some of the money he got from the Ministry of Social Development for the emergency accommodation he needed after his eviction. More on that in a couple of minutes, but first her reaction to what we have learned this week.
It still feels like yesterday my dad was evicted, because it was such a stressful process for myself and my family. So I'm very angry and disappointed that, and I still believe he was wrongfully evicted.
And Casey, it wasn't only the eviction Robert suffered, and it's really worth stressing this because you absolutely believed what Housing New Zealand was telling you, that there was a serious meth contamination problem, so serious Robert had to go, and so serious that he lost all his furniture, all his possessions too.
Because he had stuff in his property that he had for over some time, for over 15 years, he had collected things and furniture, and you could just imagine the amount of stuff that he had in his house. He had to find a way to get rid of it because I said to him, everything's contaminated, Dad. If you're getting evicted, we need to get everything out of here. Everything has to go. And so he was quite emotionally upset, and so was I. And it was so stressful because no one actually wanted to help my dad except for his sisters. So he had support from his sisters to clean the property out. He left it in a beautiful state when he left. And the rubbish the furniture and everything inside the house, the only thing that we left were the curtains. Everything inside the house went to the rubbish dump. And when he did become rehomed, it was such a long process. It was such a stressful process to find things to put in my dad's house because he did not want to get any advances from work and income because his advances had been used up from when you actually had to pay for the motel, when it actually was, the law was that you had to pay for the motel, and then Paula Bennett changed it to where it was a non-recoverable grant, sorry.
Do you remember how much the cost of your dad's emergency accommodation was in total?
Over $44,000 the government paid for my dad to live in emergency accommodation.
And that's because one room in his house was 0.09 above the lowest limit.
Yes.
Of that $44,000, how much did your dad have to return?
He has to return 10,000. It's between 8,000 and 10,000 that he owes MSD for emergency accommodation, and it still comes out of his benefit today. And that's something that my dad and I have spoken about, because we also believe that that should be waived, that he should not have to pay that money.
So your dad is still repaying the cost of his emergency accommodation, or at least the first part of his emergency accommodation before the government agreed to pick up the bill?
Yes, John.
And this is emergency accommodation that he only had to take out because he was evicted on the basis of an incredibly low meth contamination in one of 8 rooms tested.
Yes, John.
It's Casey McCarry. Sir Peter Gluckman is the Prime Minister's Science Advisor. The work from his team has this week brought this issue to its extraordinary head. I asked Sir Peter, was Robert Eruiti's health at risk from a sample in one room of 0.59?
No. I mean, that's just a tragic misuse of information, even in the past. That's sad.
What was going on that stuff like that was happening?
Well, I think at the end of the day, there's been some really sloppy thinking, presumably with interests involved along the way, that has led to standards that were developed internationally for one particular purpose, somehow sliding over to be used in New Zealand because of a large beat up on and being misused for other purposes.
And so the standard was for labs, wasn't it? It was where methamphetamine was being produced.
Yeah, the standard was produced. Well, the concept of measuring meth down and cleaning to a certain level was developed entirely to be certain that where meth had been synthesized illegally, that the place had been cleaned adequately to be sure that solvents and other chemicals and meth were reduced to a level that was safe for human habitation. Somewhere along the line in New Zealand, and only in New Zealand, that level of adequate cleaning went somehow transmitted to being a safety level for passive surface contamination with meth.
And you have said repeatedly this week that there is no evidence whatsoever anywhere in the world from the scientific literature you have studied of third-hand harm as a result of that kind of contamination.
Correct. I mean, we have, I think of all the things that surprised me was, given the messaging that was out there that passive exposure was dangerous, to actually get into the literature, the medical literature, and really study it in some depth, there's not one iota of evidence that levels of this kind are toxic or harmful, even with chronic repeated, exposures to these very low levels.
Now that's Sir Peter Gluckman, and we're going to hear from him again in about 5 minutes as we continue that interview. But the discussions about science and the low levels bring us to the politics, and we're bringing in our gallery team on that now. Why were levels so low and forced, and what happens next? We heard Phil Twyford apologise to Robert Eruiti on Checkpoint last December. This morning on Morning Report, he issued a general apology. The Minister says he's saying sorry because National is too gutless to do so, but National says it was just acting on the best advice it had when it was in power. So let's look at the politics. Here's Craig McCulloch.
For Mark Cowan, the meth revelations have come too late. His rental property in Balclutha tested positive late last year, and he called in the cleaners to begin decontamination.
He stripped off all the wallpaper and pulled up all the carpets, but now I realise that there's been no need to have that done.
Mr. Cowan's insurance claim was denied because he couldn't prove when the contamination occurred. He's now out of pocket by $40,000, $17,000 for the clean-up, the rest on refurbishments. He was told it was necessary at the time. Now it appears needless, and the money wasted. A report this week from the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor found no health risk from living in a house where meth had previously only been smoked. This morning, the Housing Minister Phil Twyford apologised to people wrongly booted out of their state houses and to the duped landlords, people like Mr. Cowan.
And because Paula Bennett and her colleagues are too gutless to front up and apologise for their failure, I will apologise on their behalf.
But just as the revelations came too late, so too the apology. Mr. Cowan says saying sorry alone just won't cut it.
Good on the Labor government for sorting it, but now they've just got to back it up with a payout to the people affected. You know, the government set the guidelines, we all abided by them, and then we're penalised in all different ways.
Mr. Twyford has ordered a comprehensive report from Housing New Zealand into the saga and opened the door slightly to the possibility of a payout for those wronged.
I'm not ruling it out, Let's have a look at the facts, and I will share the facts, the details with the public.
But that review only covers public housing, not private landlords, which means even if compensation is paid, Mr. Cowan's unlikely to see it.
They fork out a lot of money to everybody else. I think it's only fair that they contribute in this instance.
The Greens co-leader, Marama Davidson, is pleased Mr. Twyford's apologised, But she says the blame really falls at the feet of the former minister, Paula Bennett.
Paula Bennett needs to front up and say that she is sorry for causing harm, for creating panic, for dehumanising tenants when there was no evidence, when she defied burden of proof and natural justice.
But don't expect an apology from National. Its leader, Simon Bridges, says the former government was relying on the best advice at the time.
I don't know what more we could have done in those circumstances, really.
You could have ordered
now
Sir
we
Peter
know
Gluckman to look
differently.
into it. You could have asked Sir Peter Gluckman to look into this, like Mr Twyford did.
Well, I think it's easy to say that, but we were getting scientific advice. Now we know it's different, and it's good that there will be a change in the standards it seems.
And from the former leader, Bill English, also for a time the minister in charge of Housing New Zealand, no apology either.
I'm not going to make a political statement about that. The people who succeeded me can deal with that. All I'm saying is that the government at the time acted on the official advice. It would have been unprecedented probably for the minister at the time to override that official advice.
Since the story broke, we've repeatedly asked Housing New Zealand's Chief Executive, Andrew Mackenzie, for an interview. He hasn't spoken at all to RNZ about the latest development, and yesterday his communications manager said he never will. But we tried again today anyway, just in case. No luck. Marama Davidson is encouraging the agency to front up.
They should feel that they can offer the public the information that the public are screaming for, because this is a new government and we have already shown that we want to make things better, and will never again force people to be evicted unless there is every good reason to do so.
We also rang Housing New Zealand's chair, Adrienne Young-Cooper, who declined to be interviewed. She did say she had no plans to resign. Atu iti whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCulloch ho.
So that's Craig looking at the politics. Let's return to the science by going back to our interview with Sir Peter Gluckman. And in a way, this is where the science meets the politics, because although his work is independent, he is the Prime Minister's chief science advisor. So how did he get involved?
My office is very small. I only have 3 research staff, so that we choose to do, by discussion with the government, those things are their priorities or where we suggest a priority. And in a discussion when I had an introductory meeting, as I did with a number of ministers, I had a meeting with Mr Twyford, we came to the conclusion that this was something that was worth a fresh look, that he suspected there was a problem here, and I agreed to pick it up and have 2 of my 3 team work on this for most of the last 6 months, because we were also aware in doing this report that A, we're dealing with human health, B, we're dealing with an area where there's been an enormous amount of public concern, C, it's an area where the cost to society of being wrong in our advice either way would be important. So Anne Barsley, in particular in my office, has done an immense amount of research, has spent hundreds of hours on the phone internationally and nationally talking to the various stakeholders, including the testing industry, as well as looking at the scientific evidence, as well as talking, and the report, as you will note, is externally peer-reviewed by experts, and that is the conclusion we came to as the report.
As you were looking at this and taking stock and realising the extraordinary gulf, disparity between what was being said and what was actually the case, what was your reaction?
Surprise at one level that the faulty logic along the way had been missed. Not surprised at another level, because we are not very good in New Zealand in general at getting external scientific inputs at key points into policy processes, and we're getting better. And hopefully there's a lesson in this, not just for this government, but for all governments and for the policy community, that good quality scientific review is often very helpful in getting the right policy choices. And here we've had a situation where the the value of independent scientific advice, independent of vested interests, has shown that, is I think well demonstrated.
And I just want to come back to that independence because it's so important. So the first discussion you had with the government about looking at the level of 0.5 and whether that was a justifiable or rational level was with this government after the last election.
Yes, it had briefly emerged in a discussion late in the course of the last government, but probably not at the right time in terms of the workload I had on me already. And I've got to be careful to say that the discussion didn't focus on the 0.5 level, John. It was simply we agreed it would be worth me looking again at whether we were doing the right thing around methamphetamine and housing. And so there was no discussion of levels, no discussion of standards, no discussion of process. We were just going to I agreed to take a zero-based look at the whole issue of methamphetamine testing.
So that agreement was with this government. The end of the last government, who were you talking to?
Prime Minister's Chief of Staff was my last conversation on that.
And did you talk to any ministers in the period of, say, 16, 17?
I honestly can't remember. I'm not ducking it. The reality was that it was not. I mean, as I said, I've got very limited bandwidth, and I did what I could. I was pretty busy, and with only a staff of 3, there's so much we can do.
Sir Peter Gluckman speaking to us earlier. Just before we move on, we began with Casey McCarry, Robert Eruiti's daughter, talking about his case, evicted for a very, very low sample in 1 of 8 rooms tested. That was 0.59. The minimum sample was 0.5. 58 weeks. In emergency accommodation, total cost of $44,000, and he is paying some of it back. We're trying to confirm exactly how much Robert owes MSD for his emergency accommodation post-eviction and how many other people are in a similar situation. The Ministry is working on getting that information to us, and we will bring it to you when we get it, although I suspect it will now be next week. It's 27 minutes past 5. Let's change the subject. It's been a good day for Northland. The PM and her entourage swept through the region today bearing gifts in the form of a $46 million investment package, and the reception, as you might expect, was warm. Lois Williams and our cameraman Dan Cook were there.
The children of Otangare School in Whangarei welcomed the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern with a waiata of praise. And hallelujah, their elders were thinking, mana from Wellington. And what's likely to be her last regional tour before she goes on maternity leave, Ms Ardern announced the government will spend $46 million on Northland projects. The children responded with another song of welcome. The Prime Minister told the children she loves a good waiata, and so apparently does her unborn baby.
And can I start by acknowledging the Otangare Kura for your beautiful welcome. You know, I know when I hear an amazing waiata these days because I get kicked like crazy when I hear a really good one, and I was getting kicked a lot.
Ms Ardern says she promised at Waitangi this year to work in partnership with Māori around the country to address inequality, and the package announced today was a beginning. The $46 million will be spread across projects including social housing, employment, forestry, tourism and transport.
Overall, this is all about investing in the north, generating job opportunities, investing in infrastructure and things that local government and the local communities have asked for support from government around.
$20 million is tagged for job creation and getting unemployed young people ready for work. $8.7 million will go into social housing projects in Whangarei and the far north. They'll build on the success of Kaitaia's He Korowai Trust in getting whānau into homes homes they can rent to own. The Trust manager, Ricky Houghton's pretty happy about that.
We've been so grateful. He Korowai Trust has been funded $900,000 to put 9 very low-income families into home ownership. I'm very excited for us. I'm more excited for the families.
And nearly $7 million on top of $3 million promised last year will go into Whangarei's Hundertwasser Gallery to meet building costs that have escalated in the past year.
The construction of that centre alone will create 60 full-time jobs, and that's before you look at the jobs that will be created working within that facility. It also is looking to generate net economic benefits of over $20 million to the region.
More than $6 million will go into forestry planting and job training in the far north. There's $10 million all up for tourism, including safety improvements to the Twin Coast Discovery route, and $500,000 for a study on the merits of upgrading rail in the region. The Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters says the investment in the north is long overdue.
We campaigned seriously hard for the regions and the provinces because we believed that despite their export wealth creation for our country, they were being neglected. And the great thing about this coalition is that we are dealing to the actualities of our country's economy and our country's social life.
Mr Peters says it's almost too late to undo some of the social harm that's been done in the north by years of neglect. But today's investment announcement, he says, is a good start to reversing that damage. In Kaikohe for Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ, and thank you for being with us. Coming up, it's June 1st, also known as Gypsy Day. We're going to tell you where M. bovis meat ends up. Lots of people asking us questions this week, townies. 80% of us live in urban areas, and actually, to be frank, a lot of us know bugger all about farming, so we're going to try and answer some basic questions in the next half hour. And the boss of High Performance Sport promises to move swiftly with an investigation following the sudden resignation of Cycling New Zealand coach Anthony Peterson. We'd love your feedback on meth contamination. We'd love to hear from you if you've been impacted in any way. Already heard from one landlord that spent 25 grand cleaning their house out. You can text us on 2101. Nona's next with business news, but before it all, Katrina with the headlines.
The police investigating an aggravated robbery in King Street, Hastings, have taken a 32-year-old man into custody. They say they're still looking for other people in relation to the robbery. The police expect to remain in the Karamu Road, Patterson Road area tonight as they continue their inquiries. The chair of Housing New Zealand has said she will not resign over the meth hysteria scandal, which meant hundreds of tenants were wrongly evicted after testing found traces of the illegal drug. This week, the Prime Minister's chief science advisor debunked the tests, saying no one has ever become ill from meth residue. Housing Minister Phil Twyford has now apologised to the evicted tenants, saying National, which was in power at the time, lacks the courage to do so. He's not ruling out compensation. And the former Prime Minister Bill English, who'd once been Minister in charge of Housing New Zealand, says he will not say sorry to those wronged by the botch-up. He says ministers were following the best advice at the time. A Dunedin landlord who spent thousands of dollars decontaminating a house is calling for compensation. Mark Cowan says he's spent about $40,000 cleaning and repairing his Balclutha rental after it tested positive late last year. He says he appreciates the government's apology, but it's not enough. The Commerce Commission is taking Payday lender Ferritum to the High Court over loans where it says borrowers were charged 183% in interest. The Commission hopes a judge will order some of the customers' loans to be reopened. It says the company allegedly used pressure-selling tactics and oppressive terms and did not use reasonable care in its advertisements. The Prime Minister says the government's $46 million investment package for Northland is aimed at addressing inequality. Jacinda Ardern, who made a whirlwind tour of the far north today, says the investments include job creation, housing, tourism and $500,000 to invest rail in Northland. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Nona Peltier, have you been drinking?
No, I have not. I don't even know why you would suggest such a thing.
Well, Todd Niles' farewell drinks are upstairs.
Yes, I know. It's sad day for all
the end
this.
of an era. Sarah, the
That's
end.
not me though. No,
No.
I've got the numbers sorted here, John.
But I know you're going to go and join the drinks,
Well,
right?
of course, the
Yeah,
speeches
okay.
have started,
Yeah.
John. Let's get on with it.
Okay. Right. So tell us what you've come to tell us, and that is
All right.
it's Back to the Future for Air New Zealand
Yes.
and Qantas, who are now going to coach you on 115 domestic routes in New Zealand and Australia. Who knew there were 115 domestic routes in New Zealand and
There
Australia?
aren't 115 in New
Right.
Zealand, but
In
combined,
Australia, yeah.
combined there are. So there's 30 routes in New Zealand that are going to be code shared, as well as 85 in Australia.
What's that even mean?
Okay, I'll explain how it means. So
Yeah.
like if you're traveling on Air New Zealand to Australia, but you want to go to Newcastle, let's say, you could
Book all the way through.
You could book all the way through, your bags, everything.
all the way through.
And you'll also get the best connection because the whole thing is managed in that way. And it works the same way in New Zealand. So at the moment, if you fly with Qantas, you arrive here, you might have to switch onto an Air New Zealand flight to, say, Gisborne.
Well, you would, because there's no Qantas flights in New Zealand, is there? So
Yes.
if you were coming for a holiday in Gisborne, let's use that example, you
Yeah.
would have to get your bags and change to a different
Right.
airline. Now you would go all the way through.
And you have to re-ticket as well. Like
Right.
it's not that, but this is nicely smoothed over, so you got one goes to the next. Yeah, it's quite
Why
convenient.
do they want to
for the
do that?
traveler.
What's in it for them?
Well, I asked, but I didn't get the answer I was expecting. I thought it would be because there was going to be some cost savings, a good commercial kind of activity, but no. You know, Christopher Luxon, he says, no, it's all about improving customer service, and in any case, he's confident that the arrangement that they have, now I wonder about this, he's confident that the arrangement that they have through code sharing will not require regulatory approval. Now, they failed a couple of times in the past to get there because they did breach those sort of concerns. This time they say, no, it's just a code sharing. It won't lessen competition. I have a little bit of the interview I did earlier today with Mr. Luxon.
There's no competition issue at all. It's just more about making sure that when a Qantas customer shows up in Auckland and wants to get to Kerikeri or Gisborne or Dunedin or wherever, they can actually do that very seamlessly by a Qantas customer who's travelled on a Qantas plane across the Tasman, can therefore connect to an Air New Zealand plane within the country.
He would say that, of course, Nona, Christopher Luxon, but they're confident they can make this work.
They are confident they can make it work, and you know what? The whole idea is that they say it's about really improving customer service and also giving them an opportunity to work together on other kinds of things. So, hey, we'll see how that goes.
Thank you, Nona. What happened on the markets to end the week?
Okay, so Air New Zealand share price rose 4% on that, and that's against a market that was otherwise down 0.25%, a drop of 23 points to 8,636. Our dollar is holding on to its gains. There's been a lot of turmoil in the markets. Anyways, that's 69.9 US cents, 92.6 Australian, and 52.7 pence.
Nona Peltier, get upstairs.
I will.
Yeah, not that we don't love having you downstairs with us. Thanks, Nona. The Trump administration has pulled the trigger on higher tariffs for steel and aluminium imports, hitting the US's closest allies. The European Union, Mexico and Canada are all affected. The move has been labelled brutal, illegal, unacceptable, retaliatory, you name it. Retaliatory action is being promised with more. Here's the ABC's Jonathan here.
The United States is Canada's closest ally and major trading partner, but Donald Trump's new tariffs are threatening what has traditionally been a warm relationship between Washington and Ottawa. The Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau.
Let me be clear. These tariffs are totally unacceptable.
Here's the numbers. A 25% tax has been placed on US steel imports from the EU, Canada and Mexico. A 10% tariff has been placed on aluminium.
The American administration has made a decision today that we deplore and obviously is going to lead to retaliatory measures, as it must, but we regret that. We would much rather move together in partnership, understanding that no two countries have economies as interwoven and mutually beneficial as Canada and the United States.
Chrystia Freeland is the Canadian Foreign Minister.
This is $16.6 billion of retaliation. This is the strongest trade action Canada has taken in the post-war era. This is a very strong response. It is a proportionate response. It is perfectly reciprocal.
Washington's European allies are also angry. France is considering taxing a range of products, including bourbon and motorcycles. The French Foreign Affairs Minister, Jean-Yves Le Drian.
C'est une mesure brutale, c'est une mesure inacceptable. It is a brutal and unacceptable decision. We condemn this decision. We are also going to take measures on the European level to counter it and to protect ourselves.
Berlin is also thinking along similar lines. German Economy Minister Peter Altmaier.
The European Union was ready for talks. We put an attractive offer on the table. The European Union now will analyse the decision of the US. We will act decisively and jointly. And that does not exclude possible countermeasures.
But back in the US, there's surprise over this level of anger. To Wilbur Ross, the US Commerce Secretary, it's all just a friendly spat between allies.
These are blips in the radar screen. I don't think they change the fundamentals of relationship. Everybody has spats every now and again. Every family does, every country does with others. There's nothing weird about that. I think everybody will get over this in due course.
Australia has been exempted from the tariffs.
It was Jonathan here reporting Canada has been the first to retaliate, announcing duties on up to $16.6 billion of American imports. Let's head home again with the time at 20 to 6. People stormed out of an emergency hui today and protested plans to build an alternative track on Te Mata Peak, around the corner from Havelock North, of course. Ngāti Kahungunu and Craggy Range Winery announced yesterday they would close the existing controversial track and build a new one that will protect areas of cultural significance. But while that seemed to bring a near 6-month-long stoush to an end, in fact, it's left many people stunned and angry. Te Manu Korehi reporter Te Aniwa Huri Hanganui reports.
Tempers were running hot over the track and its replacement at an emergency hui at Waipatu Marae in Hastings today. Ngāti Kahungunu tried to assure those present that the new plan it has unveiled with Craggy Range will benefit everyone. But representatives of Waimarama Marae blasted Ngāti Kahungunu's chairman Ngāhiwi Tomoana for signing off on the deal without speaking to them first. It follows months of protests after the winery carved the track up the eastern slope of Te Mata Peak without consulting Māori on land believed to be the figure of an ancestral chief. Florence Karaitiana attended the hui, but says it has come far too late.
Ngāhiwi gave his report, which is miles too late. It should have been done before he made the decision, in my view. My whānau at Waimarama Marae stood and left, so we followed suit. The last comment I heard Ngāhiwi say was, "You asked me to shut down the track, I've shut down the track." Quite correct, but we didn't ask him to go and create another one. And we certainly didn't get him to make a decision on anything.
Florence says people from Waimarama Marae ended up storming out of the hui. Ngāti Kahungunu and Craggy Range will purchase 28 hectares of land between them, which will be used to create a new track. Ngāti Kahungunu says in a statement, Wāhi Tapu, or sacred areas, will be protected, and it will allow mana whenua to be the guardians of their own land. But Waimarama Kaumātua Robert MacDonald says all hapu should have been consulted before that agreement was reached.
Why wasn't anybody consulted before the decision was made? There was no consultation with any group. It was just a decision made by one person, basically.
And Tony Wairama, who wanted to remove the existing track, says all that effort has fallen flat.
What a total utter waste of time. The whole kawa of the way they did this was deceitful, and I don't think that the Craggy Winery people truly understand our mai.
Local Christine Kidwell says it's been a long and tiring fight to get Te Mata Peak back to its original state. The mountain is more than just a landmark to her whānau and hapu, it's the body of their ancestor, Rongokako. She says it's been heartbreaking to see it be disfigured and handled in this way.
That's a significant site in itself. It's actually been massacred in our eyes, you know. I mean, I'm 70 plus. I've got older sisters and brothers older than me. For our family, I believe it's taken away that feeling of our story in regards to how Rongokako was shaped up there.
Ms Kidwell hopes hapu will be at the table when plans for the new track are developed. Representatives from Waimarama Marae planned to head to Craggy Range Winery late this afternoon to protest the new track, a new track that at this stage seems as controversial as the last one. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko te aniwa, hurihanga nui aho.
16 minutes to 6, a medical professional was fired as she tried to prove she was being bullied on the job at Tauranga Hospital. Anna Shaw says she endured 4 years of feeling belittled, bullied and ignored by management at the hospital run by the Bay of Plenty DHB. The DHB asked her to provide evidence she was bullied and she gave them patient notes she says a co-worker had tampered with. She was then fired for breaching patient confidentiality. Now, the Wireless's Mava Inoka has been investigating staff suicides and bullying allegations at Tauranga Hospital, and she filed this report.
Anna Shaw, a South African with over 24 years clinical experience, joined Tauranga Hospital in 2010. She said she'd only been there for a few months when colleagues defaced an inspiring quote stuck on the staff room wall.
They put words like lesbian, they circled the word A, needs encouragement, circle that and put to be fired, loser, downgrade, all the stuff was put up, was directed to me.
How do you know?
Because when I walked in, I saw it and I ignored it. I made it as though I didn't see it. And the one particular girl that was a problem said to me, oh, have you seen this? Look, you know, making a whole big thing.
Ms. Shaw told management, but she says nothing was done. Things got worse. She says colleagues told her she should go back to South Africa and called her an African wildebeest and a black lady. Anna Shaw says trainings were held on days where she couldn't attend, and her learning opportunities were blocked by management. Her confidence plummeted. Her mental health suffered and she started feeling suicidal. She says she complained, but the DHB told her they didn't get involved in interpersonal conflicts. But then management acted quickly when she emailed her colleagues about an issue that was affecting patient safety. Anna Shaw was reprimanded for the way she had addressed staff, and a formal investigation was launched into her message.
I didn't accuse anybody, I didn't blame anybody. You know, I just said, let's work together. This is a serious mistake. This patient needs urgent attention.
After a 4-month investigation and a 50-page report, the DHB decided Anna Shaw's 11-line email breached email policy and she should be disciplined.
I felt they were trying to put a mark against my name, basically to shut me up.
Anna Shaw hired a lawyer and lodged a personal grievance. She was put on special leave and asked to produce evidence of bullying. She filed 5 folders with documents, including some patient reports. She says she blocked out names with black marker and made sure the files didn't leave the hospital grounds. But she was then fired for breaching patient confidentiality.
Then I got a call to say I breached patient confidentiality, or they found that the documents that I handed, I have breached patient confidentiality, and they're firing me on it. They're disciplining me for it, and to lead to a dismissal.
The DHB says it found significant and material differences between the accounts RNZ uncovered in its investigation into alleged bullying and what appears in hospital records. It won't comment on Anna Shaw's case while it is before the Employment Relations Authority, but says historic incidents were investigated and appropriate actions taken at the time. But her employment advocate, Alan Hulse, says there has been a blatant disregard for employment law in Anna Shaw's case.
The ironic part about it is they fired her for doing it, and then the official who received the patient note sent it to 3 other people in the organisation, as it was. So technically, that person breached it, and so did the 3 that received it. So it was a sham.
For its part, the board says it is firmly committed to an anti-bullying culture and takes allegations of inappropriate behaviour very seriously. But Alan Hulse says this is not an isolated case, and his company, which specialises in workplace bullying, currently has 3 other complaints about this DHB. He's highly critical of the way the DHB is dealing with the issue.
The difference between the Bay of Plenty DHB and a lot of other employers is that the bullying is condoned at a high level.
Mr Hulse says under the Health and Safety Act, the hospital is obliged to provide a safe working environment for all its staff, and it's not doing that. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi pō, ko Mava I nuka aho.
And you can read Mava's full investigation on the RNZ website, rnz.co.nz. Oh, sorry, radionz.co.nz. The boss of High Performance Sport has promised to move swiftly with this organisation's investigation into an alleged inappropriate relationship and bullying from departed cycling NZ coach Anthony Peden. Mr Peden was head sprint coach from September 2013 and only stepped down on Wednesday, but the terms of reference are expected to be announced next week. This has all happened rather suddenly. Cycling New Zealand told us it's not in a position to comment. Our sports reporter Clay Wilson asked CEO Michael Scott when he first became aware of the allegations.
I first became aware of this matter in early May and immediately contacted the Chief Executive of Cycling New Zealand. He then obviously has taken action as a result of my contact. But there were staff in the organisation that had elevated the information previously, and there was no action taken.
So when you became aware of it in May, what information were you made aware of? What were the details surrounding what you knew at that time?
I was made aware of the allegation relating to a relationship with an athlete.
Was there anything mentioned in terms of bullying behaviour, inappropriate behaviour of that nature? It's obviously been reported along those lines.
Not at that time, but subsequent to that I have heard secondhand, obviously, those other allegations.
You obviously can't speak and don't want to speak for Cycling New Zealand, but in terms of them being made aware, was the open communication between both parties at all times in terms of they were aware of the same things that you guys were aware of at similar times?
That's what I would like the investigation to consider. What was known when and by who, and how was it elevated in particular within High Performance Sport New Zealand.
So I guess it sounds like you're admitting there's some failings within the organisation in terms of things should have been brought to light sooner and acted on more promptly?
I'm admitting some shortcomings in our organisation, but the nature and extent of those we need to examine through the investigation.
Anthony obviously had a lot of success during his time with Cycling New Zealand. Do you feel like, from what you know, that that's contributed to the way this was handled? Perhaps he was having success doing what he was doing, and that had an impact on the way the situation has been handled?
To be honest, I can't comment on that because I'm relatively new to the role. But what I can and do want to stress that there is no place for bullying or any other behaviour to that extreme to be involved in high performance sport. We do operate in a pressure and intense environment, but again, want to stress that there is absolutely no place for bullying in our high performance system. But I can certainly guarantee that I will not be doing the investigation. I think it needs to be separate from the Chief Executive. But again, I'll confirm the process, the terms of reference after I have a board meeting in the coming days.
So that is the boss of High Performance Sport New Zealand, the CEO, Michael Scott, talking to our reporter Clay Wilson. We've been trying very hard to get hold of Anthony Peden, and we haven't managed to get hold of him. Anthony, if you're listening and you do want to talk to us, we'd love to hear from you. It is 8 minutes to 6. So much feedback coming in on methamphetamine and Housing New Zealand. John, I'm a landlord who was screwed over by this as well. The insurance company would not pay out for cleaning or loss of rent and said that the contamination would not affect the health of tenants, but I could not re-rent because I had evidence from testing that the levels were above health department levels. It's very clear the insurance company knew the standards were safe a year ago when I claimed. John says, Pete from Auckland, I'm 67 years old, legally blind and chronically ill. I've been on a Housing New Zealand waiting list since 2006. Holy moly, Pete. If you can afford to buy any pay at all, you can afford to pay private rent or give state houses to people in honest need who keep and abide by tenancy obligations. If you smoke pee, you're out. No exceptions, no excuses, and certainly no apologies. And Anthony from Kitty in the far north, says something similar. No doubt about it. If you or your family and visitors have smoked meth in our houses, you should be evicted. Those houses are not a right, they're a privilege. Another John, we're a dime a dozen, aren't we, says, Hi John. Probably way down the list of concerns in connection with the methamphetamine contamination issue, but how about insurance companies' premiums, which were jacked up on the basis of this concern? Should we policyholders expect a refund anytime soon? That's a very good question. We'll talk to the insurance industry about that. Next week, there's an awful lot of feedback coming in on this. A lot of people wondering what exactly was driving the ferocity of the policing of the 0.5 limit in the context of the fact that this seems to have been particular to New Zealand, although some people are suggesting it's not, and that there doesn't seem to be scientific evidence of great veracity that suggests any kind of threat of health risks from third-hand exposure at those levels. Well, we're trying to get those answers, and we are trying to get hold of the advice that the Nats, particularly Simon Bridges, you heard before, and Paula Bennett, have been telling us they were getting during the period of 2016-17. And once we receive that advice, we will, of course, report it to you. Right, it's 5:30 to 6. You're with Checkpoint on Friday night. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for your feedback. Homelessness, it's an issue we've looked at a lot on this program, particularly in Auckland, of course, but it is not just on the rise in our biggest cities. The Mailroom, a Nelson-based men's support and advocacy service, says the problem in Nelson is increasing as fast as it is in Wellington and Auckland. Census data shows the number of homeless in Nelson almost doubled to 400 in the 7 years to 2013. And 5 years on, the problem is likely to be much worse. Our Nelson regional reporter, Tracy Neal, filed this report.
They say Nelson is a nice place to be homeless in summer, but in winter the temperatures can plunge as low as -3 degrees. Tama knows this. He's camping out with other homeless men waiting for a room in Nelson's boarding hostel, Franklin Village.
We spend about $20 on stuff for the camp, the gas, the water, who gets the water, and we kind of share our food. We have boil-ups.
Tama used to have a job, a house, a family and a car. His story is typical among the men surveyed for the report, says co-researcher Philip Chapman. He has run the mailroom for 15 years and says he's recently noticed a trend.
Over the last year, the mailroom found more and more we were getting guys coming in homeless. We saw a real increase about halfway through last year. So that's what we're dealing with, and we've realised that we need to start looking after this group.
The research explored the experiences of 35 homeless men with health, social and correctional services in the Nelson area. Most of the men were Māori or Pacifica. 21 lived rough out in the open, about 7 lived in a night shelter, and the remainder in what's termed basic housing, such as a shed. About half had mental health issues, most had left school without any qualifications, and most had suffered family violence. Nelson Mayor Rachel Rees says the report is a snapshot of New Zealand today.
What we do know, based on census data, is that between 2006 and 2013, Nelson, Auckland and Wellington regions saw the biggest increase in homelessness. And where Nelson sits is very, very poorly understood at a government level.
Patariki Tawhio joined Tama in telling his story at today's launch. He blames no one else for his situation.
How did I end up here like this? Because I chose it. I chose to be here. And I've worked in Nelson here for over 25 years. I've planted trees up in these hills here. I've chucked fish and pork down there.
The survey shows many homeless people suffer prejudice from members of the public. Mr. Tawhio says it's distressing.
I can be walking down the street and I'll pick up something, or even out of the bins, and then they treat me like, oh, I'm a bum, I'm a scum, I'm worthless. But I can say my 10 cents worth. I helped build this town.
Philip Chapman says while there are agencies set up to help, there are gaps in how they connect with those in greatest need.
If they didn't present very well and they hadn't had a shower that day and all of those things, you know, they were just found some people would be fantastic to them, others wouldn't. So it wasn't the agencies they ever criticised, it was the people that worked there.
Despite all this, Mr Tafio says there have been some brighter moments.
There are people that actually looked after me when I was out on the streets. They come up to me and they say, have you got anything to eat? Are you warm? Are you... And I say, oh yes, I'm fine, thank you.
Mayor Rachel Rees hopes the report will be a catalyst for change and says the Nelson Council is committed to working with other agencies to address the problem. A community forum is planned for later in the year to look at immediate practical steps. I wakatu mō te hōtaka o te ata nei, ko Tracy Neal tēnei.
50 seconds before 6, Frank from Raglan asks via text 2101. Hi John, I would be interested to know how many state houses have been left empty after these spurious drug tests, and can they now be reopened, or have they been left to deteriorate for too long? Frank, I'm so delighted to tell you that as part of my research, or our research, I have here the vacant properties by reason 30 June 2017 from Housing New Zealand, and I can tell you there are 1,592 vacant properties. Well, there were 30 June 2017, so that's a year ago. 265 of them were methamphetamine contaminated houses and 73 suspected, so roughly 1 in 5, which is an extraordinarily high number during a housing crisis. Thank you for asking, Frank, and I'm so proud I could answer. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Talofa lava, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The chair of Housing New Zealand says she'll not resign over the meth hysteria scandal. The Housing Minister, Phil Twyford, this morning apologised to hundreds of the housing agency's tenants who were wrongly evicted from their state houses after it misused meth tests. A report from the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor has found there was no health risk from third-hand exposure to meth residues and that it was simply a moral panic. Mr Twyford says the housing agency treated its tenants appallingly and wasted more than $100 million on unnecessary decontamination. He's ordered a full review. Housing New Zealand's chair, Adrienne Young-Cooper, would not be interviewed but says she will not resign. Its chief executive, Andrew Mackenzie, also refuses to be interviewed. The National Party denies it's gutless for refusing to say sorry to those wronged over the meth testing, saying its ministers were following the best advice at the time. Nationals leader Simon Bridges says what happened is not good enough, but his party is not to blame.
We were relying on advice, scientific advice, wider advice, and, I don't know what more we could have done in those circumstances, really.
Simon Bridges says Mr Twyford's apology was insincere and people deserve better. A 32-year-old man has been arrested following an aggravated robbery in Hawke's Bay this afternoon. Police officers and the armed offenders responded to reports of a robbery at a bar on King Street at around midday. They then went to a residential address on Karamu Road South trying to locate the offenders. The police are still seeking other people in relation to the robbery. Residents are being told to expect a police presence in the Karamu Road and Patterson Road area tonight. The Commerce Commission has launched High Court proceedings against payday lender Ferritum, which it says charged borrowers 183% in interest. The Commission hopes a judge will order some of the customers' loans to be reopened. Jill Bonnet reports.
The Commerce Commission says the company failed to help borrowers reach informed decisions about the loans, allegedly using pressure selling tactics and oppressive terms. It also says Ferritum failed to exercise reasonable care in its advertisements. The Commission hopes a judge will order some of the customers' loans to be reopened. The announcement follows an industry-wide investigation in 2016 by the Commission. Yesterday it launched a review of the websites of 215 lenders to determine if they were complying with lender responsibilities. Jill Bonnet aho.
Key United States allies have warned they'll retaliate over Washington's decision to impose tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. Canada has announced retaliatory duties on up to $16 billion of American imports. The European Union and Mexico also say they'll impose duties on American goods. The President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, also denounced the move.
This is a bad day for the world trade. The European Union cannot react to that with
out any kind of reaction. So we'll immediately introduce counterbalancing measures. What they can do, we are able to do exactly the same. It's totally unacceptable.
European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. South Aucklanders say they're shocked and disappointed with the Auckland City Council's decision to introduce a fuel tax. Councillors have voted to bring in an 11.5 cent a litre regional fuel tax to fund transport projects, which is expected to be introduced in July. South Aucklander Rebecca Samo says she struggles with the current price of fuel, so the new tax will make things worse.
Most of us are not high income earners. So it's, it's the budgeting as well, and the money financially, it affects us financially. I'm already with a one income earner, and I've got 3 children, so it's already affecting me, and it's not even high.
Rebecca Samo. Legislation allowing the tax is expected through Parliament in June. Many people in the Waimarama community are unhappy with plans to build an alternative track on Te Mata Peak. Ngāti Kahanunu and Craggy Range Winery have agreed to close the existing controversial track and build a new one that they say will protect areas of cultural significance. But members of Waimarama Marae stormed out of an emergency hui this morning, unhappy that they were never consulted about the agreement. One of them, Florence Karaitiana, says Ngāti Kahanunu's chairman, Ngahiwi Tomoana, should have consulted with Hapu first.
We only found out yesterday that an agreement had been signed off. I think at the end of the day, Ngahiwi may realise that, he may have just gone and stepped out of line a little bit with his people.
Florence Karaitiana. It's 6:05. Sport. High Performance Sport New Zealand boss Michael Scott says full details of their failings in dealing with allegations of misconduct surrounding departed Cycling New Zealand coach Anthony Peden will be revealed after an investigation. Scott admits his organisation should have taken action sooner in relation to bullying and inappropriate behaviour from Peden, who's since stepped down from his role. Scott says he didn't know how far back the allegations go, but insists that type of behaviour isn't tolerated.
We want a high-performing, robust, successful system for New Zealand, but bullying has no absolute place, and we must put athlete welfare at the forefront.
Michael Scott. The Highlanders defensive coach Glenn Delaney says a new tackle rule, which will be trialled this year, should open the game up. In an attempt to reduce the risk of head injuries, World Rugby has decided to lower the tackle height from the line of the shoulders to below the nipple line. The new rule will be trialled at next week's World Under-20 Championships in France. Delaney says he's always favoured tackling around the legs, and this rule means there'll be no more offloads and more challenges on defence.
If you're low chop tackling, you're not stopping the ball, so you've got to work on what your second man and third man are doing. The game's set up as an attacking contest, and you just got to try and stop it. So every time there's an innovation on one side of the ball, there's a reaction on the other. So what you'll see now is, with a potential height line being put in for the defensive tackle collision, they'll open up areas for the attack.
Glenn Delaney, that's the news.
This Sunday morning, legendary author Michael Ondaatje writes all his drafts by hand and doesn't plan his plots.
But I find that if I know what I'm going to write before I sit down to write, I'm going to be a tad bored.
And with new technologies, do we still care about GE-free foods? John Carapiet says, oh yes we do.
We've got to respect the customer, and our customers are saying we want clean, natural, safe, ethically produced food. Those are the macro global trends.
Join me, Wallace Chapin, from 7, Sunday morning on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, a few showers developing this afternoon. Rain spreading south tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. Northeasterlies, gale in exposed places tomorrow. Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, a few showers becoming more frequent tomorrow. Auckland to Waitomo, also Taumaranui and Taupo, mainly fine today. Cloud increasing tomorrow and patchy rain spreading south. Taranaki to the Kapiti coast, including Taihape, fine with morning frosts in sheltered places. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, cloudy periods, a few showers south of Napier, spreading further north tomorrow morning but clearing about Wellington. For all of the South Island except Canterbury and coastal Marlborough, fine with morning frosts but persistent low cloud and fog in some valleys. Canterbury and coastal Marlborough mostly cloudy, a few showers developing this evening. The Chatham Islands cloudy periods and the odd shower. It's 8 minutes past 6. Have you been drinking, John?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
But only a small amount. I want you to know that I remain sober in control of a radio station.
Very good. Can we just say goodbye to? I'd like to just say goodbye, to Todd Niall.
Yeah.
One of the best voices.
Beautiful voice.
Beautiful voice. Low key, unflappable, lovely. One of the loveliest people that I've ever dealt with, as far as journalism is concerned at this company. It's just. He's been fantastic to work with, and we'll all miss him. And you and Todd have been here probably a similar length of time, have you? How long? Yeah, well, he's come and gone. He's been here just under 30 years, about 30 years, and I've been here 31 and yeah, so it's always nice. He's very funny, dry wit, very funny.
I'm sorry we're missing the speeches that are taking place upstairs at the moment.
Yeah, they're being recorded. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you, Katrina. That's a lovely tribute to Todd. We appreciate it. Thanks. Lots of feedback coming in. Dilip asks a rather large, almost metaphysical question. Dilip, housing homeless. Why does humanity park cars in garages and leave fellow humans homeless, cold and hungry? Just dwell on that one for a moment. But Ken says, hey, John boy, get some cheerful stuff. I'm getting depressed. Sorry, Ken. Right, let's move on with the time at 6:09. Thousands of cows are on the move today as share milkers relocate their herds and themselves for the winter months as part of what's known as Gypsy Day. With that comes uncertainty as farmers try to protect their precious herds from being infected with Mycoplasma bovis while they are in transit. Con Young travelled to mid-Canterbury to talk to farmers during their busiest day of the year.
Share milker Lyndon Grant has been walking his 500 cows over the past week, 20 kilometres up the road to the paddocks they'll call home for the winter months. This year he's had to take extra measures, such as informing farmers along the route so they can keep their own stock away from his and prevent any nose-to-nose contact between cows, one of the main means of transmitting Mycoplasma bovis. There's a lot of trust involved that the farms he's sending his cattle to are M. bovis free and that his herd is not a threat to the farm they're heading to.
It's a bit worrying, but at the end of the day, we can only do what we do. We're farmers, we've got to carry on farming. As long as we talk to everyone and use best practice, I feel we should be fine. We've been milk tested, and I mean, that's all we can do. We're clear, but who's to say we're not? With unreliable sort of testing, but we can only do what we do. We've talked to guys and they said they're clear, so we've just got to go with that information and go for it.
As a share milker, Lyndon doesn't own any land, meaning all of his money is tied up in his herd. If just one of his cows was infected with M. bovis, he would lose everything he's worked so hard at building up over the past 5 years.
All my equities in my cows, it's massive for us. But once again, if I worried about it, we wouldn't sleep at night, and we just got to carry on and hope that everyone we're talking to is telling the truth and go from there.
Some of Lyndon's cows will spend the winter in paddocks neighbouring Chris Ford's farm. Chris farms 1,800 cows across 2 properties and will move his own stock onto winter pastures from next week. As the local chair of Federated Farmers' Dairy Section, he helped organise a meeting in Ashburton on Wednesday night that attracted 500 farmers who had lots of questions for the Minister of Agriculture and Biosecurity, Damien O'Connor. A theme that came up repeatedly was the need for more information about which farms are infected.
People would like more information. There is a good reason why some of these privacy things are in place, and if you have a question or want to know something, you go straight to the farmer, straight to the source, and ask. Instead of mucking around with different channels. Go straight to the source and ask the question.
MPI has been out in force today ensuring all cows that are being moved have been tagged as part of the National Animal Identification and Tracing Scheme, or NAIT for short. Chris Ford says the fact the scheme hasn't been complied with has made it more difficult than it should have been to trace the spread of M. bovis, and he says there's room for improvement.
It's like another job. We're given 2 days to put any entries in, and I think in some cases, in a lot of cases, just farmers just haven't had time to sit down and do it, and they do all their entries as batch data entries. So once a fortnight, they might sit down and actually do all their data entry. I think there's ways to improve it. Make things more with apps. Have an app, so when your cows go that day, as they walk past the scanner, it's downloaded straight to your phone, straight to NAIT, and your movement's done, recorded with no extra stress.
Chris Ford says the practice of moving cattle from one end of the country to the other for winter grazing, or as part of the daily trading of stock that goes on in New Zealand, may have to change if the spread of M. bovis is going to be stopped. But he says most problems will be sorted out through due diligence and asking lots of questions about where stock have come from in the first place. In mid-Canterbury for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young tēnei.
Thank you, Conan. Mycoplasma bovis, M. bovis, whatever you call it, we began the week with the government's decision to attempt to eradicate it. Now, we fancy ourselves as a farming nation, and of course we are, but more than 3/4 of us live in urban areas, and it's at times like this, perhaps, that many townies realise how little we know about farming and crisis management in farming. Throughout this week, we've received an enormous number of questions from you. In short, what happens to the animals and what happens to the meat is the theme of most of the questions we've received. So we recruited an expert. Peter Conley is CEO of AMSCO Meat, one of the country's 3 major meat processors, who are in the process of, slaughtering the cattle that have been ordered to be slaughtered. Thousands of cattle have been killed since M. bovis was detected last July, and there's 126,000 more to go. And as Pete Conley told me, this is already a busy time of the year.
Currently, plants are full, and that's quite normal. That situation will continue through most of June, and that's the result of, we're going through autumn into winter. The dairy herd is being dried off, and this is the time of year where we get a spike in numbers coming from the dairy industry with cows that come to slaughter out of the cull cow herd.
So it's normally a busy time. Has bovis added to how busy you are?
Bovis has put additional pressure on. I think in the scheme of things with the overall industry capacity, the levels that we can operate to for ANSCO in particular currently we're managing with what we're having to do. I think that if we were to have a huge influx now of livestock, which I don't expect, it would put pressure on. But I think with the numbers they're talking, some 30,000 head of cattle in the first wave that would probably start to come for processing in the next 3 to 4 weeks' time, I think the industry probably has sufficient capacity to be able to manage that.
Right, can we talk about the process? Do you have to treat cattle with M. bovis or who are suspected of having M. bovis any differently?
Yes, we do. So those cattle are effectively they're directed to slaughter. Once those come onto a processing site, they need to be segregated, and then we work them through the process. We process those animals, and then we're required to go through a cleaning program. So obviously we disinfect our plants. We also have to disinfect any transport operators that have been involved in bringing those animals onto our facilities.
And are they treated after slaughter the same way all the other cattle coming through at this time of year are treated?
Yes, they are.
And so they're going into the food chain the same as every other beast that's coming through?
Yes, that's the case. There's absolutely no human health risk from M. bovis cattle. There's no food safety risk from M. bovis cattle. And, Mycoplasma bovis is a global disease. My understanding is that today only Norway is the country that doesn't have it. So if you look at the major beef processing regions of the world, North America, Australia, South America, it's all managed within their herds.
Okay, so for people who are concerned about this, you're saying don't be, but if they remain concerned, there is actually no way of knowing whether the meat they're buying at their butchers or their supermarkets or wherever is from the bovis stock or not from the bovis stock.
I think at the moment they should. We've all been reassured. The government's reassured us, and as I say, there's plenty of global experience in terms of this disease. So, but from a New Zealand market perspective, these animals are coming into the processing plants. They're being processed into a product form which by and large probably doesn't, I think if people think that they're going into a supermarket and buying a steak, and it could be from an M. bovis processed cattle. That's not the case. The cattle that have come to slaughter, certainly in the case of our company anyway, have come from the dairy herd. That the products that we produce off those animals we would describe as a manufacturing beef product. So they're very lean, they're very suitable products, they're actually an excellent ingredient into ground beef processing. So they would be used in things like mince and patties and meatballs and products like that. So they're not your table steak cuts, they're not the products you'd traditionally buy in your supermarket or restaurants.
Peter, who's paying for these animals? So if a slaughter is ordered, if MPI go in and say, yep, your stock is contaminated or there is a real risk of contamination, what's the market say about how much those animals are worth? So we, how we've been operating, how ANSCO's been operating is effectively we've been paying those farmers for any cows that come to ANSCO the same as what we would pay to any other supplier of cows to ANSCO. So, for example, if you sent a cow to ANSCO next week, and I'm just talking in terms of averages here, but let's say you'd get $750 a cow. I guess the issue for the farmers that are sending these cattle to slaughter is what those cattle are worth as a dairy animal. And so let's say a dairy animal, and I'm not sure what they would be exactly worth, but let's say they're worth $2,500. There's obviously a significant difference between that animal as a milk-producing animal versus what it's worth as a meat animal. Right, so a productive dairy cow is worth more than a cow that is simply meat. And correct. So who's paying the difference? Who pays the difference? That's the MPI compensation, is it, between the dairy value and the meat value? Yeah, so that's the MPI compensation piece, and that's where they pick up the difference between what a farmer supplier would realise as a meat animal versus what the animal's deemed to be worth. So are you slaughtering animals that wouldn't otherwise be slaughtered? In other words, are you slaughtering animals that are in the height of their dairy productivity? Yes, we will be. Normally we would get cows when they're no longer they're effectively at the end of their productive life from a dairy perspective. So yes, definitely with the infected properties and restricted properties and the cattle that are being directed to slaughter, that's a situation where whole herds are being taken out. Yeah. And so we're ending up with animals which, obviously could be very early into the stages of being productive animals. And that speaks to the difference between their meat value and their market value, right? Which is correct. The MPI, correct. Right? Okay. Correct. Yeah. Pregnant? Have you had to slaughter any pregnant animals? I can't really answer that. I'm not totally sure. Obviously, animals normally are scanned for pregnancy, and obviously farmers wouldn't send those to slaughter. I suspect that with the M. bovis cattle coming through, given that we're seeing whole herds taken out and that cows are in their pregnancy cycle, there will be some pregnant animals coming to slaughter. That's unfortunate, but I think that's a necessary outcome given the decision that's been made. That's Peter Conley, who is the CEO of AMSCO, one of the country's three major meat processors. 22 minutes past 6. South Auckland residents say they're shocked and disappointed at Auckland Council's decision to introduce a fuel tax. Some even say the impending price hike has come as a total surprise. Councillors yesterday voted, of course, to bring in an 11.5 cent a litre regional fuel tax from July to fund transport projects in the city. The tax has been in train for some time, and Mayor Phil Goff says the consequences would be inconceivable if it was not introduced. Katie Scotcher reports.
At Otara Shopping Centre, Rebecca Summer is meeting up with her friends, all student nurses. Every day Miss Summer drives from Pukekohe to Manukau for classes and says she spends up to $20 a day on fuel. She had no idea soaring fuel prices are set to climb even higher next month.
Most of us are not high income earners, So it's, you know, it's the budgeting as well, and the money financially, it affects us financially. I'm already like with a one income earner, and I've got 3 children, so it's already affecting me, and it's not even like high.
Louise Defy lives on Auckland's North Shore to be close to work, but frequently comes to Otahuhu as she says everything is cheaper there. Ms Defy is unhappy about the impending petrol price increase, but knows there isn't much she can do about it.
You just have to adjust to everything, you know, with the rising costs of everything in Auckland. You know, you have to adjust one way or other, or sooner or later you're going to end up homeless, you know, or out of a job. You know, finding ways of, you know, putting food on the table, getting to work, you know, things like that.
Otara resident Wayne Joseph is also unimpressed with the tax. He works night shifts at his local hardware store and says he and his friends often carpool to work to save money and gas. But he's worried having to spend more money on fuel will mean he won't be able to provide for his family.
I have like 2 kids and a dog to feed, and a car, and a phone, and a phone to feed too.
Mona King counts herself lucky she doesn't have a long commute to her retail job every day. Ms King says the tax is ridiculous and will hurt people on low incomes.
It could stop them from going to work. Well, I wouldn't. All my paycheck would be going on gas. I'd stop going to work, to be quite honest with you. I think the benefit's going to go up because people can't get to work, and that's going to be the honest truth of it.
Legislation allowing the tax is expected to pass this month ahead of its introduction on July 1st. In Auckland for Checkpoint, ko Katie Scotcher tēnei.
Lots of people texting in to wish Todd Nile well. Thank you, and we will pass your texts on. He'll be delighted to receive them. Lots of people from outside of Auckland saying that Todd made Auckland palatable, which is a big achievement, I suspect, in some parts of the country. Thank you all. Frank, our wonderful mate Frank Muscasi says traffic at a near standstill. State Highway 2 south of Upper Hutt. Is that along the River Road there, Frank, or further south? Anyway, delay travel if possible. If you are listening to us stuck in the traffic, we've no idea what's going on. We'll try to find out in the next 4 and a bit minutes. Thanks, Frank, for being our impromptu traffic reporter. Dear Donald, North Korean officials are expected to hand deliver a letter to the US President Donald Trump from their leader Kim Jong-un tomorrow. It follows top-level meetings between the senior North Korean aide Kim Yong-chol and the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in New York to try and advance this month's planned summit in Singapore between the two leaders. This is an on-again, off-again affair. People living in hope with more. Here's the BBC's Nick Bryant.
A smiling US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo meeting a North Korean General Kim Yong-chol, a one-time spy master and his leader's right-hand man. Steak was on the menu, and that summit in Singapore. The fact that even this meeting is taking place shows how rapidly and how dramatically relations between America and North Korea have changed. Less than 9 months ago, Donald Trump was just up the road at the United Nations, threatening to totally destroy that country. Today's meeting felt like diplomatic speed dating. It was over quicker than expected. And that was a sign of great progress, according to the Americans, and also an indication of how much both sides want this summit to take place.
Our two countries face a pivotal moment in our relationship in which it could be nothing short of tragic to let this opportunity go to waste. I believe they are contemplating a path forward where they can make a strategic shift, one that their country has not been prepared to make before.
The North Koreans are carrying a personal letter from Kim Jong-un to Donald Trump, and tomorrow in Washington they'll make a remarkable journey, walking through the doors of the White House to deliver it. And just a week after cancelling the summit, the president has now indicated there could be multiple meetings.
Hopefully we'll have a meeting on the 12th that's going along very well, but I want it to be meaningful. It doesn't mean it gets all done at one meeting. Maybe you have to have a second or a third, and maybe we'll have none. But it's in good hands, that I can tell you.
Whether the two sides even agree on what's meant by denuclearization is still unclear, but it does look increasingly likely that Air Force One will soon be on a flight path to Singapore.
That report from the BBC's Nick Bryant has that wonderful voice, clipped and every letter hits home. Lots of feedback coming in from Todd, for Todd Nile, from Really lovely people who've appreciated his work over, 3 decades at RNZ. Todd now retiring. No, he will be missed. We call him our Todd as he's a local. All I can say is God help the Kimu Huapai local board, because there's nothing more scary than a retired RNZ journo asking pertinent questions, says Fiona from Helensville. Fiona, he's not retiring, he's actually going to our mates at Stuff, aka, or formerly known as Fairfax, and Todd's going to continue his Auckland round over on Ponsonby Road, or top of Williamson Ave, with the Fairfax crew, with whom, of course, RNZ has a content sharing partnership. So we'll still be associated with Todd. Thus, all the best, Todd Naya. We will miss your informative counts of the latest Auckland news, your voice and your reporting style. You'll be sorely missed by listeners, and I'm sure your colleagues loved your book about the Trekker too, say Winnie and Gordon. And best wishes to Todd Nile. As a non-Aucklander, I've appreciated the astuteness of his analysis of Auckland Council and America's Cup issues. I will miss hearing him on RNZ, and that lovely feedback from people is just indicative of what people are saying about Todd tonight. In fact, the speeches, I think, are still going on upstairs, so in about a minute and a half we'll go up there. I think Todd's been speaking for some time himself. There are plenty of stories to tell. Just before we go, people... Oh, Frank's saying, you're welcome, John. Traffic stalled south of Hayward Hills, State Highway 58. That's all I know. Been in traffic for about an hour now, says Frank. What's going on, Frank? Just before we go, once more I strive to add balance to the M. Bovis debate. New Zealand is a very agricultural dependent nation, so we're required to rally around the industry, but there is nonetheless echoes of the global financial crisis here. I've worked for 40 years in construction. There are regulations, and consequently, if I build a house without consent, no one will compensate me for the loss of said property. So how about the government compensate those farmers who have fully met their obligations under NATE? Those who have failed to do so should have to live with the consequences of having to fail to comply with the rules, says Andy from Wellington, ending the show for the week. Before I cough, thank you for being with us. Have a wonderful weekend.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A 32-year-old man has been arrested after an aggravated robbery in Hastings at midday today. Housing New Zealand Chair Adrian Young-Cooper says she'll not resign over the meth hysteria scandal. The National Party says it will not apologise to State House tenants wronged over the meth testing, insisting its ministers were following the best advice at the time. The Commerce Commission is taking High Court proceedings against the Payday lender Ferritum, which it says charged borrowers 183% in interest. And Canada has announced tit-for-tat duties on $16 billion of American imports after the US imposed tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. Our next news and weather is at 7.
On Country Life this week, the average cyclist that comes through is spending $174 a day here.
That's a lot of money.
The trail has been the single most